Did you know that in August of this year, Holy Trinity will be celebrating its 35th anniversary as a congregation? When you look back at the past 35 years, it's easy to see God's hand at work, leading us through new challenges and opportunities, granting growth in membership and in facilities, opening up new avenues of discipleship, and more. But when you look back at the past 35 years, it's also easy to see how we, as a congregation, have changed significantly over time. I've often heard members talking about what you might call the good old days. They'll speak fondly of events and activities that our congregation used to engage in regularly. And 9 times out of 10, what these members are highlighting and remembering are fellowship events. They were instances of the congregation, both young and old, coming together for unique programs and activities and experiences, both here at the church and out in the community. What these members have tapped into, what they've more or less expressed in sharing their memories with me, is that fellowship and a sense of community is deeply woven into the fabric of our congregation. The way they talk about it, it's as though fellowship and community are in our congregation's DNA. Well, it turns out these members were onto something. And it all has to do with this piece of paper sitting beside me right here. Usually it hangs in the narthex. You might have passed by it a time or two. This document is the official charter which established Holy Trinity as a congregation in August of 1986. Not many people actually notice this document on Sunday mornings. Otherwise, they might straighten it out after it gets bumped a time or two and suddenly goes crooked. Back then, just 35 years ago, Holy Trinity consisted of just a handful of households. 29 signatures stacked atop one another in these 3 columns, including the nearly illegible scrawlings of several young children, are there. Affixing their names to the charter, this small, multi-generational set of people saw themselves on a mission. As the population of Edmond was growing at a rapid pace, these families saw potential for kingdom growth. They saw the plot of land on 164th Street as a prime location for planting a church and making an impact on this side of town. While their former congregation was intent on remaining a small congregation, these earliest members of Holy Trinity saw their responsibility to share the love and forgiveness of Jesus Christ in the world around them. And so, on August 17, 1986, they attached their names to this piece of history, this charter. And recently, I took a look at what it said, and something caught my eye that I want to share with you today. I rediscovered these words for myself when I was straightening out the frame on the wall one day. It reads, "At this time, we also wish to emphasize the nature of our congregation, namely, that we are not a closed society, but a redemptive community, sharing the love and forgiveness of Jesus Christ for the building up of each other in His body, and proclaiming that love and forgiveness for the extension of His kingdom. We see our life together as a thing of joy. It is a celebration of God's gift for His world and a realization of our responsibility for that world." It's a beautiful description, I think, especially those words of being a redemptive community doing life together. I had a chance to sit down with some of the other charter members at Holy Trinity. They told me some stories of what it looked like in those early days of being a redemptive community and doing life together. Moving around from worship, from home to cheap motel rooms, and even to the Edmond music stores, wherever they could find a place for worship. These 14 families were engaging in life together. In those first years, every member was regularly involved in and dedicated to Bible study. We had intergenerational Sunday school classes and in-home study groups. This was all life together. When they broke ground for the church building and began assisting laborers for Christ to construct it, every member was involved in some capacity. This was life together. And when it came to regular maintenance of the facility, every family took a turn in rotation. This was life together. Likewise, it was understood that outreach in the community and a welcoming of visitors was all a responsibility of every single member. This was doing life together. There was an understood focus on evangelism and mission by every member. They were a redeemed people with a message of redemption to share with one another and with the world. They were a redemptive community. Looking at this frame, I stand in admiration for what those early members sacrificed for the sake of Christ and for His kingdom in this place. I often stand in awe at the Holy Spirit who blessed their efforts, who worked through the planted seeds of the gospel, and who continually added to the numbers of Holy Trinity. By our 10th anniversary, we had about 500 members. Currently, in our 35th anniversary, we're between 1,200 and 1,300 members. God has given such an increase in our 35 years, so praise be to God for that. But whenever I look at this charter, I also get the sense that something is just a little off. Something is missing. And it's more than just the fact that a lot of these names on the page have moved on or passed on even. 35 years ago, every member was 100% all in on the mission of Holy Trinity. But I don't know if the same can be said for today. Or at least I imagine that most of the congregation is on board with the idea of our mission and vision of making disciples, but just not 100% all in on making it happen. Back then, 35 years ago, our earliest members were 100% in on worship and Bible study. And if they weren't, there was someone checking in with them so that no one slipped away and everyone's needs were met. However, in 2020, just prior to COVID, we averaged between 30 to 40% in worship, even less in Bible study, and checking in with members who aren't in attendance is extremely difficult with so many people on our rolls. This past year of the pandemic has only caused us to drift further apart from one another. Back then, 35 years ago, they truly were a redemptive community doing life together. But now when I look at this document in the hallway, I don't just see a frame that needs realignment after being bumped sometimes. I see a mission and a vision that need realignment after years of busy ministry. Or rather, I see busy ministries that need realignment with our mission and vision. Don't get me wrong, I don't think the solution for our way forward is going back to being a congregation of 29 people and taking turns mowing the grass and mopping up all the floors. Nor do I imagine that it will be possible to achieve 100% worship and Bible study attendance by all 1,300 plus of our members. Nor am I saying that we've done anything wrong in our ministry over these past 35 years. It's simply that every once in a while, we need a healthy reminder of who we are as a congregation and what we're about, our mission, our vision, and our values, lest we walk down the hallway and forget about it. With that in mind, I'd like to share with you some information that I presented to our Voters Assembly a few weeks ago. First is another frame for us to consider. This frame doesn't hang in our hallway, but it is one that we've used in our leadership board, elders, and voters meetings over the past 4 years. This is what I call our vision frame. In the center is our vision, but first, around it, holding that vision in place, is a frame. The top here is our mission statement. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to observe all I have commanded you. We are disciples who make disciples who make disciples. On this column, we have our right frame is what I call it. It's our values. We are Christ-centered, biblically based people with a Lutheran distinction. We value service and outreach, fellowship, Christian education, and worship. And because we value these things, we take them seriously and we seek to do them well, which leads us to this side, this frame over here. Tied to our values on this frame, you see our description of what it means to be a disciple. If that's what we're trying to do is make disciples, we have to understand what it means to be a disciple. A disciple engages in our values, and a disciple does the things Christ commanded of his disciples. So what did he command? He said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. That's from Matthew chapter 22. In John 13, Jesus said, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. And then finally, the other great commission. If our mission statement is the Great Commission from Matthew 28, this Great Commission comes from Acts chapter 1, which reads, you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth. So again, a disciple engages in our values, and a disciple does the things Christ commanded of his disciples, which leads us to this bottom frame here, our strategy of how we go about achieving our mission and vision. Love God, love one another, and love your neighbor. All of this, these four sides hold together our vision, loosely based on that Acts 1:8 passage, that we will equip followers of Jesus to be powerful witnesses of the gospel in their everyday lives, in our homes, in our communities, in our nation, and around the world. That is our vision frame. But I want us to be able to look at our ministry plan through a more accessible way. I call this the vision frame, so think about what types of things are framed. A congregational charter is framed, but doesn't exactly tell us what we're doing, really. A picture is framed, but the images are lifeless and still. A window is framed, and that helps us a bit to see the world going forward, but I would say it's more of a specific type of window. Since we're on a mission to go, as Jesus said, our frame requires that sense of movement forward. So I want you to think of it like this, like the window in your car. Imagine the road as our mission. Here's a really cheesy picture. Look at this thing. The road, it leads to our horizon, which is our vision. Now the road, from this perspective, it looks straight going forward, but it narrows along, and things can get tricky along the road. Might have some bumps and curves along the way that we don't see right now. We may even change directions at some point, and that's okay. Right now, we can see what's right in front of us in these trees, but as you go further, it maybe gets a little bit hazy, a little hard to see. We don't know what the future will bring. We can only plan so far in advance on our road in mission. Along the way toward our vision horizon, we may even stop and smell the flowers, right? We may stop when we get out of the woods and check for directions, make sure we're still going the right way. We may find a few scenic overlooks to take it all in and reflect on the journey where we've been so far and celebrate. And along the way, what moves us forward down the road, like wheels turning round and round and round, is our strategy. Love God, love one another, love your neighbor. Love God, love one another, love your neighbor. Love God, love one another, and love your neighbor. Okay, well that's a nice cheesy picture, Pastor. So what does that look like in practical ministerial actions? Well, I'd say it looks like this, sort of. This is a snapshot of our ministry plan as we're looking out the window. And it will be available in this packet that I've got here. You can have a copy of it too. It's available online and in the church office. Now, when you see this snapshot of our ministry plan, don't get caught up in anything past the year 3 mark. Because remember, we don't know what the future looks like. We didn't plan for the pandemic, and there it came. We don't know what the future looks like, so some of the plans we have may take longer to get to. Some may come sooner, and some may be changed entirely. We never get to them. That's okay. But we need a plan to work toward. We need a road map for our ministry with a few mile markers along the way. We hope to reach these mile markers through quarterly objectives and yearly plans and evaluations and assessments. When you view the packet, you'll maybe notice a few acronyms and unfamiliar words listed in there. For instance, WHW is listed in there. It refers to Welcome Home Weekend. You know that. Another one is in regards to our hopes for expanding our school, starting in part with an early childhood center. So when you see the letters EC on here, that stands for early childhood. In order to accomplish that expansion in our school, that will take a capital campaign. An exploratory committee has been formed to that end already, so you'll find the letters CC on here referring to the capital campaign, and when we hope to officially launch it as well. If you have any questions or thoughts on this roadmap, this ministry plan, I and the leadership board, the elders, the staff, we'd be happy to engage in conversation with you. This ministry plan is meant to be an opportunity for us as a congregation to dream together, to look ahead to the future God has in store for us as a community. But this ministry plan is also intentionally laid out in a way that allows us to realign our ministries and our programming with our mission and our vision. Our hope is to reclaim those aspects of our DNA stated in the charter, to be a redemptive community doing life together once again, striving toward common goals together. In light of all that I've presented so far, I want to talk briefly about Band-Aid Day. By now, hopefully you've seen some of the information regarding Band-Aid Day, July 1st, in which we plan to tear off our COVID restrictions like tearing off a Band-Aid. But this goes beyond simply ending our RSVP system and sitting every other pew, bringing back donuts and coffee and sharing the peace. No, the changes to our Sunday routine starting in July are all meant to help us rediscover and reclaim our identity as a redemptive community doing life together. The reality is, it takes time to pass the offering plates in worship. It takes time to do the sharing of the peace. It takes time to kneel at communion. It takes time to talk with one another between services beyond just the simple hello and a handshake. And it takes time for good preaching. I know, and we'll probably get comments. The preaching has gotten longer over the past year. But the answer, I'm convinced, is not shorter preaching. The answer is not to go back to 15-minute sermons to continue on exactly as it was before COVID. In a world that is not biblically based or Christ-centered, I think we need more preaching, not less. And because we value worship, the answer is not simply to cut large portions of liturgy all the time. And because in our DNA as a congregation, based on our charter, is a focus on intentionally doing life together, that means a realignment of our Sunday routines. So again, as you may have already seen or heard, starting in July, our services will be spread out in a way that allows for plenty of time for enriching services, as well as opening up opportunities for fellowship and conversation between pastors and parishioners. Our Sunday morning routine, starting in July, will begin with traditional worship at 8 a.m. Discipleship hour will begin at 9:30. The modern service will begin at 10:30 with the next traditional service starting at 10:45, so there's a switch there. And I want you to know, this is not just a Pastor Meyer decision. The leadership board, elders, staff have all been involved in these conversations, moving in this direction. And each of these groups, the leadership board, elders, and staff, and I, are all excited about these adjustments, even though we know it may be uncomfortable for a time. But we would be more than happy to talk with you about how these adjustments will positively impact our mission of making disciples who make disciples as a redemptive community. Because I don't know about you, but after a year of just maintaining, after years of plateauing in church attendance and member involvement, I'm ready to change the story. I'm ready to go somewhere with our mission. I'm ready to move forward toward our vision horizon. I'm ready to make not just church attenders, but disciples engaged in life together, in being the redemptive community God in Christ has called us to be. You've graciously trusted me over the past year of the pandemic, even when it was difficult, even when we didn't like some of it. So I'm asking you to trust me some more as we go down the road of our mission of making disciples who make disciples. I'm asking you to join me in realigning the frame that's gone slightly askew over the past 35 years. I'm asking for you to work beside me to love God, love one another, and to love your neighbor. So may God, who has brought us together as a redemptive community, continue to bless and keep us and direct us in this life together.